You know the classic movie trope about the character who starts out being very timid and afraid to do things, but by the end of the story they have found an inner confidence? Well, that was me in the summer before high school. I have always been a very anxious and shy person. You could ask anyone who knew me when I was younger, and they would tell you that I almost never spoke. An example of this was in my science class in 6th grade, when the teacher called on me and I couldn't respond. The teacher was determined to get me to talk, so she made the whole class sit in silence for 10 minutes. From the second I got called on, the anxiety just kept building and building until my throat had started to close, blocking most of my air from getting in or out and causing me to have trouble breathing. I was on the verge of tears. My anxiety had literally taken over my body until I physically couldn't talk, and yet the teacher still expected me to respond. This was a typical anxiety attack that happened way too often for me back then. I could go on and on about the various ways my life has been affected by anxiety. But now I'm much better, and I attribute that to the experience that I'm going to talk about today. This story is about a time more recently where I was able to face my fears and develop ways to deal with my anxiety. This story begins in spring semester of 8th grade in my science class. It was a special day in class because we were having presenters from the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History come and present to us. The main purpose of the presentation was to recruit people for a program at the museum called Quasars to Sea Stars, or just Quasars for short. I was immediately interested, but unfortunately you can't join until the summer after 9th grade, so I went for the second best option, Volunteens. Volunteens is a program where teens can volunteer at the museum during the summer by leading tours and working in the Butterfly Pavilion. I went through the whole process of applying for the program, starting with filling out an application and sending it in. After a while, I got an email asking me if I wanted to come in for a group interview. This didn't sound too great to me, but I knew I had to go if I wanted this to happen. So I sent an email back saying I could make it. When the time for my interview arrived, my mother dropped me off. Before I walked into the museum, she told me how proud she was of me for being brave enough to participate in the group interview, whether I got the position or not. The interview actually went surprisingly well. I felt good about my interview, and I was content to wait to hear if I had been accepted or not. When I finally heard that I had been accepted, I was incredibly excited but also very nervous. During the time between hearing that I had been accepted and when the program actually started, I tried to relax and prepare myself so I wouldn't be too nervous on the first day. A few weeks passed, and it was finally time to start. My first day wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. For our first tour, we gave it to the camp kids for practice, and we were able to use our scripts the whole time. Although not presenting to regular museum guests and having that safe blanket of our scripts may have been easier and taken more of the stress off, I was still nervous and had trouble speaking loudly enough for the entire large group to hear me. However, they were young kids, so it's not likely they were paying very much attention. During our first time in the Butterfly Pavilion, we shadowed one of the more experienced volunteers so we could learn how it works when you're in there. The Butterfly Pavilion was better for me in some respects and worse for me in others. While working the doors, it was very easy because I only had to welcome visitors in or see them out. However, when not at the door, I had to answer questions to which I didn't always know the answer. This subsequently spiked my anxiety. But all in all, the first day was pretty okay. As the summer went on, I slowly got better and more confident with what I was doing. By the end of the summer, I had become much more confident and able to control my anxiety better. There were a few times that I got very overwhelmed and considered quitting, but I am so glad I kept pushing myself, because if I had given up, then I not only would have sacrificed community service I earned, but possibly my future at the museum. If I hadn't faced my fears, I wouldn't be who I am now. I guess those movie tropes really are true.